we had a lot of chemicals, especially used in refrigerants like air conditioners and
Right.
refrigerators and things. Remember, there was that big push to change from certain chemicals to other chemicals because we were creating a hole in the ozone.
Right.
And there was a direct correlation to that to skin cancer. And that was more of like an immediate threat. And so through legislation and cooperation with other countries, those chemicals are now actually banned. No manufacturer uses them anymore, mostly because the handful of countries that don't ban them, it doesn't really matter for their sales. So like if you were making a car with an air conditioner, you wouldn't use these dangerous chemicals. You'd use the approved chemicals because you'd want to sell them in all the countries that have banned them.
Right.
So you might as well make one product that works. So we were very successful there. And we proved that there were holes in our ozone and that this was a direct contributor. And nowadays, you don't really hear very much about the ozone.
Right. You don't.
And that's because there still are holes in the ozone.
But did it repair itself?
But yes, a lot of the damage has been undone. And we're recording.
All right.
So, hey, I was thinking that today we could talk about climate change. I know that's like, I don't know why it's like such a thing. Well, I do know why it's such a thing in the media, but I don't know why it's such a debated thing. Let me ask you, like, what do you think of climate change? And when I say that, I mean, what do you think it is? Like as far as it's discussed in the media and why we're talking about global warming and things like that.
So for me, what I think it is our general climate throughout the world is changing drastically, and then what I mean by drastically is that like it's going up, maybe by like a degree or a half a degree in like crucial areas, but enough to where like experts and scientists can be concerned, because whatever the reason is, we don't have a way to control that.
Well, let me ask you this. What's wrong with that? I mean, why should we have a problem with the planet getting warmer?
Well, I mean, I think, for me, the obvious answer will be because we have like polar ice caps.
Okay.
So those areas are crucial that we don't want those to get warmer by any degree, because ice melting is not a good thing.
And I hope you don't take this as me like picking on you, but everything you said I agree with so far. But I'm wondering, like, how far does your knowledge go? Because I feel like other people than just us have that stance.
Right.
But I don't think they fully understand why that's bad. So do you know why it's so bad if the polar ice caps melt?
Because that would lead to like the oceans rising. So a simple thing that I would try to explain to people is like fill a glass up like to the top with already some ice in there, and then slowly add like ice and then just watch it overflow, because it's a similar situation. Like, we have a lot of like low laying areas that could easily be overcome by rising water.
Sure, but let's say we are doing something, or the planet is warming for some reason. Well, I mean, we'll get into what I believe in a minute, but so the polar ice caps are melting. But couldn't we just correct our problem, have the temperatures of the planet come down, and then the polar ice caps would refreeze.
Okay, those things don't happen like overnight. That's not
Sure.
an instant thing. So whatever.
But if we did do it, no matter how much time it took, couldn't they just refreeze?
Well, they didn't like. Once again, they didn't like unfreeze. They didn't thaw, and you know.
Well, they're melting now, though.
Yeah, did it? But yeah. So I mean, there's like we can take some steps to like correct some things, but like once again, those are going to take some time. So that's why it would be crucial to take some action now.
But do you know what it would take to undo that change?
Oh no, I don't even know if there would be anything you can that you can do to correct the melting ice now, but you could take some steps to prevent further ice from melting.
So yes, that correct. So kind of. Let me explain. So the way the ice at the poles was formed, and the reason why it's so high up, because some of this ice is like a mile or more high, and you know, in the form of like huge glaciers or huge ice, I guess walls, for lack of a better term. I don't want to, you know, set off flat earth. There's not a wall around, but like a big wall at the poles. The way it got there is through the last ice age, or one of the ice ages. I mean, they could have all built on top of each other to build up the ice at the poles. And the issue with that is that the snow and the ice that's there is actually fresh water ice or snow. It's not salty like the ocean. So the problem is that when that melts and then drains down, you know, the ice wall or mountain or wherever it is, falls into the ocean and then melts in the ocean, and then raises the ocean levels. The only way to get that stuff back is through snowfall. Well, I shouldn't say the only way, but that's one of the ways that you get it back. So you would need to have another ice age in order for the rising sea levels to be undone. But at least as far as we can tell from like ice samples and rock core samples and you know, different earth core samples, for lack of a better term, that would extend way down into the United States. I mean, it would basically make huge portions of the planet not ideal for us to live in.
Right.
I mean, it would be covered with massive amounts of ice and things like that. We would have to go through that whole cycle to undo that. So the problem with warming the planet and allowing the ice at the poles to melt is to undo it. I almost want to say impossible, but I guess, you know, we don't know what future technologies could bring.
Right.
But you would literally have to desalinate ocean water so that it's fresh again, and then put it back on the poles as snow. I mean,
yeah,
is that even possible? I mean, you'd have to have one plant to remove one machine to remove the salt, and then another machine, like a big bunch of big snow machines.
Yeah.
And we're talking at a global level. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the effort would be ridiculous.
Yeah. So what have you heard from people who don't believe that like climate change is a real thing? Like, what are their reasons? Because I haven't really dug into that much, but I mean, I hear people kind of deny it, and you know, don't think they're like, what, you know, it's not a big deal.
I think one of the main problems is that it's been politicized, and people think, at least in this country, that liberals think one thing and conservatives think the other. And I would say in general, not in every case, but in this country, liberals believe in climate change and conservatives don't. Now, I realize that that doesn't encapsulate everyone,
Right.
but I would say on average that's probably the case. And I think one of the issues is since the other side is saying it, and especially how tribal our entire society has become,
Right.
people will just disagree with anything that the other side says. But for the longest time, I had heard of it almost like saying that scientists are saying that it's not the case. Like I remember when I was younger, I would hear things like, well, there isn't a scientific consensus on this, or scientists can't agree, or scientists are still looking into this. Or you'd see on the news, you'd see debates where, let's say they were going to have a climate change activist or a scientist or somebody talking about climate change and some of the things that we should do to correct some of these problems that we're creating. And then the other side would be upset. So these so-called news programs or channels would then decide, well, we'll have somebody for and someone against. So then when you're watching this, it gives the false impression that it's a debate and that it's 50-50. But in reality, it's not anywhere near that. In fact, a little bit of history on this. So scientists have actually been talking about climate change and hypothesizing how human beings could negatively affect the planet for a long time. But really, it came into the spotlight in the 80s, and or maybe the late 70s, early 80s, late 70s, somewhere in there. And at least from what I've read online, and I've looked into this a lot because I find it interesting. I find it mostly interesting that there are so many people that think it's a hoax. But it started out with a bunch of studies actually being done by the scientists at ExxonMobil. And, you know, they were looking to find out, like some people had made comments about how it can't be good for us burning fossil fuels. And so they actually just started doing some research into it. And they started looking at, what are the negative effects? Because, I mean, hey, for all they knew, there might be no negative effects. And if they had a bunch of scientists proving it, well, then that would be great for them. But what ended up happening is they showed the negative effects it could have on our climate, on our atmosphere, what warming the planet would do. And these are all things that they said, would happen over the next like 40, 50, 60 years. And they actually started publishing papers and going through the peer review process. And that's when the oil companies kind of started shutting things down for the fact that they were just like, whoa, we asked you to do one thing and now you're doing this. And they're like, well, this is how science works. We have a hypothesis, we test it, then we have our peers look at it, then they test it, and then we start to come together with a consensus so we can come up with some type of theory. And but by that point, it was already too late. Like it was just out in the public, and other scientists were really starting to seriously look at it. And so I'd say by the mid 80s, it looks like something like, I want to say 70 to 75% of climate scientists were going, okay, there is a problem and we believe it's us. But if you look at the media, maybe not as much now, but definitely like 10, 20 years ago, you'd think it was 50-50. But I don't think that was really the case. I mean, once they actually started working on it and finding out if we're doing something bad, from that point on, they all seem to be in a consensus. And again, in a consensus, just for anybody who maybe doesn't understand, that means the majority.
Yeah.
And so anything over 50% would be the majority.
Okay.
Also in the 80s, we started talking about the ozone. And we had a lot of chemicals, especially used in refrigerants like air conditioners and
Right.
refrigerators and things. Remember, there was that big push to change from certain chemicals to
Yeah.
other chemicals because we were creating a hole in the ozone.
Right.
And there was a direct correlation to that to skin cancer. And that was more of like an immediate threat. And so through legislation and cooperation with other countries, those chemicals are now actually banned. No manufacturer uses them anymore, mostly because the handful of countries that don't ban them, it doesn't really matter for their sales. So, like if you were making a car with an air conditioner, you wouldn't use these dangerous chemicals. You'd use the approved chemicals because you'd want to sell them in all the countries that have banned them.
Right.
So you might as well make one product that works. So we were very successful there, and we proved that there were holes in our ozone and that this was a direct contributor. And nowadays, you don't really hear very much about the ozone.
Right. You don't.
And that's because there still are holes in the ozone.
But did it repair itself?
But yes, a lot of the damage has been undone. And so kind of going back to like skeptics or deniers for climate change, the other thing I hear besides there isn't a consensus is, it's almost very arrogant for us to think a planet this size we can affect. But we've already proven that we can affect that because of the ozone holes and the fact that most of that damage has been undone now, or at least headed in the correct direction. That is a prime example of what's happens when we all get together and decide enough's enough. We're not going to do this anymore. And I just, that's a lot of these reasons I hear, I just think,
Yeah.
what about this? Like you say, we can't make a global change. What about this?
Right. Well, yeah. And what's interesting about like the ozone repairing itself is that you could easily see how people would come to the conclusion that, that's just the planet kind of like going through those changes and repairing itself, and they don't equate any of the changes that like humans made, to.
But we could directly see where the holes were, and they were basically where we were.
Yeah.
We were causing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then now back to the consensus. So for a second, so if we start going through the timeline of how a lot of this modern, either whether you're using the term global warming or climate change or whatever is happening, is or how you're using that term, I should say, in the modern sense. So in the 80s, we kind of looked at like fossil fuels and things like that, but we were also looking at other chemicals. Like I said, there were chemicals that badly damaged the ozone, and they were chemicals that would hang out, that would cause the ozone not to reform in that area. And once we stopped releasing them into the atmosphere, the ozone was able to reform in that area. So we were looking at all types of effects on our atmosphere and what different chemicals would do. And we knew that CO2 was a bad one. It's not actually the worst chemical for global warming, but it's the one that we release on such a huge amount. I mean, from creating electricity to powering ships to powering cars to we're just releasing it all over the place. And so by the end of the 80s and the early 90s, they actually started, there were lobbyist groups and things like that. And they started thinking, wow, this could be a thing like the problems we have with the ozone. And that seems to be getting a lot of traction. So we should probably, like the oil companies were like, hey, we should probably do something about this before they turn on us and start making rules against some of the things that we can do.
Right.
And they actually commissioned a report. And I want to say it came out in like 90 or 92, something like that, where, they had interviewed a bunch of climate scientists. And I really wish I was looking for the numbers earlier. And I just couldn't find it. And I've seen it before. Well, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't go down this path, but let me talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
The point is that they had interviewed a group of climate scientists, and they had said, how many of you believe that that the planet is warming, and also believe that human beings are directly contributing to that? And more than the majority said it. It was something like in the high 80s to low 90s. And then they kind of looked at it and were like, well, that's not the outcome we wanted for this report. So then they started going to college professors, and they would go to college professors that were in scientific fields, not necessarily in the scientific fields of, monitoring in our client or our climate, but just any scientific field. So they would go, these are scientific professors, to try to show some validity to this group, which I don't necessarily argue against, because if you're a professor at for a college, a lot of insanely incredible work gets done by these people. These people are not people that I would just dismiss. I mean, I'm saying that this is a group I'd probably talk to. I mean, number one, if we're talking about climate, I would go to the climate scientists first, which they did. And then I have no problem with them going to college professors. But the group they interviewed for the college professors was like 5 times the size of the climate scientists. And if the climate scientists percentage for saying that, yes, this is happening and it's us, let's say the number was 90, then the college professors, it was more like 70%. But the deal is like, not all of those people were specializing in fields that would directly translate to, one, being in this, and two, working on the problem or working with people who are working on it, And then they moved on from there, because they're still showing a majority. They interviewed high school science teachers. And this group was like 10 times the size of the other two groups. And basically half the high school science teachers said, it is us. And the other half said, it isn't.
Yeah.
But when you start averaging that out, now once you've averaged it all out, it's actually only in the 50s or 50 some percent. That still shows a consensus. So then they decided to interview anyone that they deemed was in a science or technology field. So they were literally asking like people like in the IT industries and stuff, which has nothing to do with this. And that group by far was the largest group. And only like 20% of them said, yeah, it's us. Well, because it wasn't really the zeitgeist of the time. It wasn't in the media as much as it is now. And then one of the main reasons it wasn't in the media is because if you listen to what they were saying in the late 70s, in the 80s, the 90s, they were saying in the early 2000s to the 2010s is when we're going to start seeing the problems start showing up.
Yeah.
So it wasn't anything we were facing in the moment. Like with the ozone, we could prove that skin cancer was on the rise right then,
Right.
So the deal is like, as we move through time, if you think about like people saying there wasn't a consensus, if you're just talking about climate scientists and those are the ones, I mean, if you had cancer and the doctor said you have cancer, then would you go check with your plumber and go, hey man, do I have cancer?
Yeah.
I mean, he might look at you and go,
Yeah.
You don't look like you got cancer to me.
Right. Yeah.
And then if you modeled that information, one person says cancer, the other person says no cancer.
Yeah.
Well, then it's a 50-50 toss-up whether you have cancer.
Yeah.
But in reality, you shouldn't listen to the plumber on medical advice, just the doctor.
Yeah.
So 100% of the experts have said that you have cancer.
Right.
He doesn't have cancer, by the way. Not that I know of. But here's my point. You see studies out right now, like there was one in 2003 by NASA. There was also some studies put out in the early 2000s by European Space Agency. Of course, there's been tons of them done by the Environmental Protection Agency. We've had reports from the Pentagon, and they're all saying it's us, and we're contributing to it. And my question for people that are saying, well, it's still up for debate, is one, almost all the reports that I've seen over the last 20 years have said that the people that they interviewed, who are professionals in the field, either 97% or 100% of them said it's happening and it's us. So where's the debate?
Well, I would assume that they don't think that any of those other sources are being genuine. That maybe they have, or that maybe they have some stake in it by saying, that it's us. Because if we're going to have to change something, then there's someone who's going to benefit by that change, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to be, a legit reason. Someone's got something to benefit from it.
Yeah, and I don't understand. It almost feels like a flat earther kind of debate. Like, what would be the thing that people gain from saying, hey, maybe we should stop polluting so much? Because I've heard a lot of this, which I just think is complete misinformation about how, well, one, it's not happening, but we just kind of went through a little bit of who has said what over time. So we know there's a consensus, and we can talk about what that they're saying and how they're saying it. But if we just look at it from like, what would be to gain from pushing a hoax like this? I have no idea. Do you have any ideas?
I don't have any idea. But I mean, once again, it's just, I don't know. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and there's always going to be that some people who are going to find a way to try to like disprove the experts and just throw some doubt out there.
Like I'm looking at right now climate.nasa.gov. So NASA's website, and it's their climate change website. And the main page, and I'll try to put this up for everyone else to see, but it says evidence, and then below it says how we know climate change is real, and then below that it says there is an unequivocal evidence that the Earth is warming at an unprecedented rate, and human activity is the principal cause. This is what NASA says. So if it is a hoax, or if it is still out for debate, which I don't believe either one of those, but I hear people say that. In fact, didn't Trump say that?
Yeah, he did.
So why? What would be the point behind this? And I've heard people say like, oh, to push green energy because the green energy companies make so much money or something like that. Like somebody's going to profit from somebody selling something. But
or simply because if we have to make a change, then like all of those fossil fuel industries that people love so much are going to end up going away, and like, isn't coal a fossil fuel? So
sure,
and it seems like that's
I mean, I get why that like oil companies or fossil fuel companies would like lobby against this because it directly hurts them.
Right.
And maybe that's the origin of a lot of this misinformation. But it's just like a normal person going about your normal daily life, and you see in the news, maybe you watch conservative news stations that are saying this is all a hoax, this is ridiculous. And then maybe you watch liberal news, which is saying we need to do something right now. This is a crisis.
Right.
And you're starting to think, well, I politically identify with group A or group B. And so then that's your stance. But beyond that, why would it be a hoax? Just ask yourself that. Like, what is the point? Like, I've said things to people before, and I've had people go, I don't believe that. And it had nothing to do with climate change. I was just saying something, and they go, I don't believe that. And I looked at them, and I thought, what is going on here? And I remember it was one of my neighbors, and I go, do you think I'm lying to you? And he goes, no. And I go, do you think I'm so stupid that I don't know that this is happening? And what we were talking about was, I live on a lake, and during the winter, the ice had pushed part of our yard into like a small wrinkle. It was like the ice was so heavy and there were really bad winds. It actually formed a small like ripple in the yard. And I was helping repair it. And I said, this is from the ice. And he goes, I don't believe that. And I'm like, I watched it happen. I was sitting inside and I could see it outside my window forming. And I just thought, what do you think? Either I'm too stupid to see this with my own eyes, or you believe that I'm lying. And my question for lying was, what would be the point in that? Like, I'm telling you that I'm helping fix something in your yard, and you're telling me I don't believe you. Okay, then whatever. But it sort of like translates to this. What would be the point? And I hear a lot of this like, okay, well, so these certain industries would lose money and these other industries would make money.
Right.
And I hear negative things towards green energy stuff. Like, do you remember, what was it, 2 years ago when there was the cold temperatures in Texas and they had huge power outages?
Yeah.
Do you remember what they blamed?
No.
So they blamed wind turbines.
Oh.
And I remember, and what's the senator or congressman from Texas, the one that went to Mexico he tried to go to Mexico during the blackouts?
Oh, Ted Cruz.
Ted Cruz.
Yeah.
He said, right on the news, well, I guess this green energy stuff just isn't ready for prime time.
Yeah.
Except for we live by a town in Michigan called Ludington. And when you drive up the highway to Ludington, there is a huge wind farm with a whole bunch of wind turbines.
Yeah.
And I remember the day that happened, and he was on the news going, well, I guess green energy doesn't work. It was all a hoax. I had to go to the grocery store, and I needed something from Ludington, so I was going to go to the grocery store in Ludington.
Yeah.
And I shot a small video on my phone, and I showed the temperature on my dash to show the outside temperature, which was 10 degrees. And then I just raised the phone up as I drove past all of these huge wind turbines, and they were working just fine.
Yeah.
Then we found out later on that the reason why some of those did freeze up and fail in Texas is because when they purchased them, they didn't pay for any of the cold weather insulating because they figured, hey, they're in Texas.
Right.
Why would you need that? And it's expensive. So here's a spot we can save a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Well, then the problem is then when you experience cold, I mean, like imagine having a house in Michigan with no insulation.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's terrible.
All of your pipes would freeze, not to mention the cost of just losing all of your heat through the walls.
Right.
But I just hear things, like you see things like that, and I remember that being like national news and them saying, oh, it's all because of these wind turbines. Or actually, they call them windmills.
Yeah. Yeah.
My question is there's no milling happening there,
yeah.
but okay, whatever, semantics. But what's the point behind that? Like they're making a political stance for what reason? Like, are they receiving money from
Probably.
the oil companies?
Probably. That's a very good possibility.
Because it's so easy to prove that these wind turbines work in cold weather. They're all over the planet. England has a whole bunch of offshore ones and a lot of, the area that they put them in is very cold and receives below freezing temperatures occasionally. We have them here in Michigan. They have them in Alaska. I mean, like a 2-second Google search will tell you that they work in cold weather. But I don't know. I feel like we talked about on one of the podcasts, like electric cars.
Yeah.
And the misconceptions and what people are saying. They say all this negative stuff. And I just feel like, have you driven one?
Yeah.
They just have like crazy things like, oh, I'm going to have to sit in the charger for 45 minutes. Do you live in the city in a high rise? No. Oh, you live in a house? Yes. And do you have a garage? Yes. Charge it there.
Yeah.
Like I just feel like everyone has an opinion and nobody's actually done any of the research.
Yeah. Yeah. Or coming up with like a solution, Yeah. It's easy for a lot of people to think about the negatives and to just throw some of those ideas out without doing any factual research, or maybe just for the idea of to disagree with the whole thing.
Yeah, or you think my group is saying one thing and I need to go with the group.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of situations like that. Like I had a neighbor act like, oh well, you can't even use solar power around here.
Oh yeah, because we know in Michigan we have a lot of cloudy, no sun days.
It's like yes, will it work better in the middle of the desert where there's probably better, I want to say better sun, but less clouds, less there's no probably trees to sure.
Yeah.
But it still works here.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that what people are gonna think about is they're not gonna equate that the solar panels are not like your only source, that you do have backup, like, because I think that they're gonna take the idea that there's no sun maybe for a week, so my house is gonna have any power.
Yeah, and I keep hearing excuses like they'll say, oh well, it'll never produce enough power to power your house. That's so not true. I mean, there are factors that go into it, like which way is your house facing, and what kind of exposure to the sun do you have? I mean, do you have trees all the way around, and is your house in shade? Okay, fine. You may have an issue there, but if you have a roof that faces towards the south, and you get sun for the majority of the day on your roof, you can use solar to some extent.
Right.
But even to completely replace, like to go off grid, I think is becoming more and more a reality. If you look at solar power panels right now, the ones that most people will buy for their homes, that you'd find in like any big box, like home improvement store, it's like somewhere between like 20 and 24% efficient. Now they can actually make panels like that are like 35% efficient. But that technology is not really mainstream, and it's more like in a laboratory kind of things. But everything starts in a lab. So I feel like we're moving that direction. The panels are getting more and more efficient. They're producing more and more power, and I don't know, like I go online and I watch reviews of panels or people that want to do what they call like green energy things, and it just feels like where are the doubters getting their information? Like, do they know anyone like that does this? Have they talked to anyone that actually owns them? Have they done any research?
No, because what people will do is that they'll look and say, because they already have it in their mind that solar panels don't work. So they will look up something that says like proof that solar panels are ineffective. Instead of being open-minded and, searching something like, are solar panels beneficial or anything like that. They'll just want to continue that they don't believe it.
Yeah, because I've often thought that at some point, I think I want to live in this area for the rest of my life. Now, whether I want to live in this home or not,
Yeah.
that's not, I don't. But I think at some point I'll tear this house down and build a new house. And I've made comments that in the future I'd want solar.
Yeah.
And I'd want some type of battery backup. Now, whether I'm fully off the grid or not, it still remains to be seen, because me building a new house isn't going to happen tomorrow. It'll probably happen in 10, 15 years. But my point is that if you look at the technology that we have today and know that it gets better through time, we have enough technology today that I could go off grid right now in a house the same size as this house. And I think when you tell people that, they think, oh, but then you're going to have to really pay attention to what you turn on and what you have, and everything's going to have to be energy efficient. I think they're missing the point entirely. I think moving forward in time, we are going to use more and more electricity. I mean, if you chart it out and you look throughout history of this country, at least, let's just narrow it down to there, we consume more and more electricity every year going forward. And in the future, we could have, you know, I don't own one right now, but I could have an electric car, or I could have an electric lawnmower, or, you know, maybe someday we all have robots or something. Either way, I think I'm going to be consuming more and more electricity. And I would be looking at setting up a solar power setup that would actually give me more power than I would currently need, knowing that I'm building it for the future. So if I was off grid and I had already prepaid for that amount of power, I would be less cautious about turning things off or making sure that they're low energy. Because if I had a house like that, one, I know where all the electricity is coming from, and it's a green source. And two, I'm not paying anyone for it. I prepaid for this electricity.
Right.
And so what would be the benefit of me like turning a light out when I leave a room? It's not hurting anyone. In fact, turning things on and off are actually harder on things than just leaving them on a lot of times.
So, so a question for you, and I'm gonna play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
So, living in Michigan, you get a home with some solar panels, but in the winter we get a lot of snow.
Yep.
So that's probably a risk right there, because you have electricity on your roof, and now you've got snow and ice.
Well, I wouldn't be worried about the electricity per se. I mean, electricity isn't something that you should be playing with, but the way that they're installed, I don't really think that'll be a factor. I think the bigger factor would be your panels being covered by snow and ice and then not collecting the sun.
So now now there's a safety hazard, because now I have to climb up there and get the snow off, in single digit weather.
Could be. But the other thing is that there are like tools to clean it off on, which are basically like telescoping devices that you can stand on the ground and then just sweep the snow off. But the other thing is that solar power panels actually generate heat. And so unless you had a large snowfall where there was a large amount of snow, which does happen here a couple times a year at least, then unless that was happening, it wouldn't accumulate. Also, as soon as the sun does start to come up, even if you had several inches there, that's where the snow would start melting first. But the deal is like, yes, if they're covered and you do nothing about it, then you won't receive any power. But depending on how the weather works, I mean, depending on what's in the forecast, it could be a scenario where it's like, okay, I could go out there and sweep the snow off, or in a day or two, it's going to be around 30. The sun will be up, the panels will heat up, they'll melt the snow themselves, and then you just have to think about battery capacity, about staying, having enough
Yeah.
battery to last you through the time.
Okay. So what about in the? Oh, so actually, before I get into that, so is there any type of because you know how on most cars, you have like your rear window, like the frost lines.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this. Yes, there is a way to cause the panels to heat up, or products that you could install that would automatically melt the snow. Now or ice. The issue with that is that it uses power. So that's something that you would have to do. There would be a trade-off there. But another thing, since I'm close to a lake, another thing that could happen is you could use geothermal power or geothermal heat to heat the panels. So at that point, you'd only be running a pump to like a geothermal well, and then it would just be exchanged with some type of liquid, probably like water with antifreeze or something in it, that would be circulated deep into the ground and warmed up, and then ran behind the panels to warm them up. But I didn't mean to dive too far into it, but my point is that everyone's saying that these technologies don't work, and that this does not happen, and these are the case. And they've been saying the same thing about electric cars, and now they're saying, that they're dirtier for the environment, or this or that. And I'm just like, do a little bit of research, because yes, a lot of this technology is newer. And I would say that's probably one of the issues with having misinformation about it, is because maybe you don't know anyone that has solar power, or anyone that has an electric vehicle, or an electric lawnmower, or anything like that. But once it become more prevalent and you start meeting people with that, like we talked before, you guys have an electric snowblower and an electric mower.
Right.
And you were telling me you like the electric mower more than the gas mower, or the electric mower was doing a better job.
Yeah.
And I just think, with a little bit of research, you can find out that these technologies aren't terrible. They're not, it's not something that you'd have to, I guess, compromise for. In a lot of ways, it could be better. And the other issue is that science has had a consensus about climate change for a long time. And to undo some of the damage we're doing, the technology doesn't exist to undo it right now. Maybe in the future.
Yeah.
But to naturally undo it, to have the planet undo it, like for the polar ice caps, we would have to go through an ice age again.
Yeah.
And the ice age is what carved the Great Lakes. That's how destructive it was. It carved these massive lakes we live by into the ground. I mean, that's a massive change to the environment and the landscape and everything else.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't understand. Even if you thought it was a hoax, is it that you don't understand these other things, what it would take to undo what we're doing? I mean, why wouldn't you just want a cleaner environment? Like you clean your house, right?
Yeah. But that's on a way bigger scale. It's way too inconvenient to have to change, thousands of people, and how they live and go about their lives on a daily basis.
But is it a change for the worst?
That's the thing. We don't know.
I mean, like you buy a new phone every couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Is that a negative change for you or a positive change?
I mean, it could be negative because then I got to program all these numbers. I got to re-get, all my apps and my games. And then if I lose
you have an
progress,
Android. I
if
know
I lose
that.
the progress in my games, this is...
I know you have an Android, so I know I've had a lot of Androids, and I know that it's all synced to your Gmail account, and that you just sign into the new phone and it starts downloading everything.
Yeah.
So you would say that you're normally excited to have a new phone.
Yeah, true. I am.
So I mean,
Yeah.
I resist change. I understand that, but a lot of these changes, are they negative?
No, not inherently negative. No, but like you said, I mean, there's people who, resist change, and this is on just a much bigger scale, and and it's thousands of people and changing their daily habits and the way that they live their life, and they don't even know if it's going to be worth it in the end. Because what if you're making these people change, and someone only lives like 5 years?
But do you
They
think
don't
it's
see any benefit.
that they're not convinced, so they feel that they shouldn't put any effort towards it?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. People are definitely not convinced on the benefits of the change, and then what we are currently doing to make the problem worse.
I guess I'm just confused. Like if somebody said to me, hey, if we keep doing this, it's going to kill all the fish in the lake. And I said, I don't think that'll kill all the fish. But I did agree dumping pollutants in the lake was bad because, sometimes I go swimming in that lake. So just, even if I didn't believe the fish thing, I would just be like, I like to get in the lake sometimes, so I don't want it dirty. Just like I like breathing, so why would I want the air dirty? Or I like drinking water, why would I want the water like? Why wouldn't you just want it clean?
Yeah, I think people have a tendency to think that things are more resilient than they are. So, you know, thinking that pollutants aren't going to hurt the fish because whatever reason the fish had to deal with something similar before, or because the fish are they can swim a little bit deeper down, so pollutants aren't going to affect them.
I was just about to say, I think part of it is like they have a half-baked scientific idea that maybe they don't fully understand.
Yeah.
And then they say like the fish can just swim deeper down to avoid that. But it's just like, I just feel like, why not do a little bit of research? Like I said, I'm looking at still right now, climate.nasa.gov. What would be the point in lying about that?
Yeah. Well, listen, the climate has always changed in the planet, on this planet.
You know what? That's true. And you know how we know that?
How?
We've looked through ice core samples and rock core samples and sediment samples, and we can see different events through time, through the history of our planet. So we know that it gets warmer and it gets colder. We were talking earlier about an ice age. So ice ages have happened, and it's not happening right now. But what part of the cycle are we in right now? If humans weren't on the planet, should it be getting warmer or colder?
Probably colder.
Yeah. Except for what is it doing?
Yeah.
It's getting warmer.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the other thing I hear is like I'll hear, especially people older than me, they'll go, when I was young, it was the same temperatures outside that it is right now. And I go, okay. And they're like, see, so climate change doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, you think the word weather and the word climate are interchangeable.
Yeah.
They are not. If you say, like, let's say 50 years ago on this day and this exact spot, the hottest day of the year was, let's just say, I'm just arbitrarily making these up, 90 degrees.
Yeah.
And then the coldest day of the year was 10 degrees. And then pretty much we had all the temperatures in between there. And then if you look at today, this year, right now, and the hottest temperature is 90 degrees and the coldest temperature for the year is 10 degrees, then you would say, oh, it's the same. But that's not climate, that's weather.
Right.
So if you add up all the days of the year, like all the temperatures for the year, and get a total, then you'll be able to divide that by the number of days that there are in a year, and you'll find out the average temperature for the year. If you take the average temperature from 50 years ago and the average temperature from now, it's warmer now. But then you tell them that, and they're just like, nah, I'm not sure that's how it works.
Yeah, because that's not how it works.
But that is how
I
it
know.
works. And it's, climate's not just, I think the other part of talking about this is climate's not one thing. We could be talking about the lakes or the oceans or weather or a lot of things. So it's kind of a pseudo ambiguous term to some degree because like where people will confuse it with weather, and I'll say, well, it's not just weather. And then they're like, well, what is everything that's included in it? And I'm sure that I'd name some things, but I am definitely missing some things. Again, I'm not a climate scientist.
Right. Yeah.
What are more excuses that you've heard?
That polar bears are still, increasing. That their numbers are going up.
I've never heard of that before, but what does that have to do with it? You saying that if the planet warms up, that polar bears won't be able to exist anymore?
Yeah, but polar bear numbers are going up. So,
okay. I don't even know where to talk about that. Like, polar bears can exist. They're not just on the ice, right? Aren't they also on land in like northern Canada and things like that?
yeah. But they get their, I don't know, they get their food source from the ocean or from the sea.
Mm-hmm.
So, if they're unable, if the temperature or the climate is changing, and they're unable to sustain their food source, then their numbers would be going down. Correct?
I mean, I guess, but see, like I was saying before, like climate isn't just weather; it's a bunch of things. Looking at something at like a macro level like that, when we're talking about something at a global level, I mean, there are probably tons of small points where you could go, well, this equals this, therefore it can't be this. But the deal is like, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands or millions of points. And to narrow in on one that goes, oh, this just doesn't fit the model, even though 90% of everything else fits the model, then that's the model we should go with and not look at it at such a granular level. Now, we may have to go down to those levels to figure out things that we can do to maybe stave off any more damage. But we were talking earlier about the polar ice caps melting, and that's basically, those were created from snow. So they're fresh water. So if we're going to raise sea levels, that means a lot of those polar ice caps would have to melt into the sea, the ocean. And they're fresh water, and the ocean is salt water. We could actually change the salinity of the ocean, and then we would kill things. And the other thing that I was seeing scientists were talking about was, you know how there's like there's currents, like in each one of the oceans, there's like a direction, which almost like a river, but in the ocean that everything flows. Changing the salinity of the water, it might not just mix, like if you took water and salt and put it in a glass and mixed it up. They could stay as different levels of salinity, almost how the oceans stay actually separated even though they're touching. And they could rise and fall to different depths of the ocean, which could stall some of the currents we have. And if that happens, then weather will change and animals will die. And it's like a cascading thing. One thing leads into another, into another, into another. And I just think, I don't get the negative of trying to stop this. And I don't understand the negative of these newer technologies. I haven't seen, like, if you listen to some people that are definitely against it, they sound like this is just all the stupidest thing ever and that they could never be convinced and that these technologies don't work. And I think, then why are so many people buying them? Wouldn't we hear stuff? It's always from people that don't have them that are giving examples. And the people that do have them, they'll tell you they're not perfect. But they're like, hey, It's doing what it advertises to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't, make breakfast, but yeah, it produces power from the sun or from the wind or from wherever.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess just with time, hopefully we're going to see more people, come on board and possibly do some quality research. Or maybe we'll just have to end up seeing something almost close to a disaster.
I actually think that's the direction we're heading. I think that as human beings, we learn better as reacting instead of preemptively doing something. And it felt like people had said for a while, we should look at alternative fuels for cars. Like I remember a lot of conversations about like hydrogen and things like that. But there was always a talk about how, you can't do electric. But over the last 10 plus years, we proved that electric cars can be a viable mode of transportation for a lot of people. And we've also, at least in this country, I should say, we have other problems. Like our power grid is very old and we're not upgrading it. And I think that's going to cause outages. And I think one person, you'll know one person that is like, I'm sick of these outages, and they'll try solar with some batteries. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, the only people that don't have to endure the outages are these people. And then people will start going sort of like they did with electric cars. Instead of going, oh, that doesn't work. And then they know somebody that has one, and they go, actually, this is pretty cool. Like they're faster than gas cars, blah, blah, blah. They do this, they do that. But then like thinking like, if we moved into a scenario where we're still not upgrading the grid and it continues to deteriorate, and then there becomes more and more power outages, somebody's going to get sick of it that and they'll pay for solar power. And then all of a sudden you'll go, oh, you don't have to endure any of this crap I have to endure. Instead of thinking, oh, that probably doesn't work. It's probably a hoax. I mean, I don't know. I just don't get where misinformation. I guess I get where it comes from, but I don't understand why people don't actively rail against it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a very good point, because it would be different if people sought to dismantle the disinformation, and then possibly just come to maybe a conclusion about not liking something on their own, but not because they're swayed or inundated by disinformation.
Do you remember? So like when we were little kids, well, technically when we were born, there were not cell phones. There were radio phones and things like that, but it wasn't very common. But then cell phones came about in the 80s, and you started seeing some people have them. I remember my dad bought one, I believe in the late 80s, and it was more of an emergency thing. Because remember, everyone had to pay for your minutes, and you didn't get many. It was very expensive. And he had what was called a bag phone. You remember these?
Yeah.
It would sit on the floor in your car.
Yeah.
And then you could unzip this bag and you could pull the phone out, and it would plug in your cigarette lighter, and it was huge. He had one of those. And I remember in the early 90s, more and more people started having portable phones that they could bring with them. Maybe not fit in your pocket, but they went on your belt or in your bag or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were what we were all calling brick phones because they were huge. And there started to be this conspiracy that was running around in the media saying that bag phones or phones mounted in people's cars, like permanently, were safer than these handheld phones because, remember this? The handheld phones, they said, cause cancer.
Yep. I do remember that.
And I would hear that, and then I would hear other people, like I remember my grandparents were never tech savvy, but I remember just the misconception of how it worked was just ridiculous. Like I remember one time my grandmother was talking to a relative on the phone. And when she was done, she looked over at my grandfather and said, "That's amazing." This was like in the early 90s. She called us from her cell phone. And I go, okay, like what's amazing about it? That's how phones work, you know? And I was like, I don't get it. And she goes, she's in Alabama and we were in Michigan. And she goes, that phone somehow reached all the way up here. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It goes to a local antenna, which is called a cell site. And that cell site is connected to the same phone lines. And those phone lines are interconnected and eventually connected to your house.
Yeah.
It didn't reach all the way up here. It probably only goes a couple miles.
Yeah.
And then my grandmother was like, oh, like it's just,
Yeah.
like, do you hear cell phones cause cancer anymore?
Well, now with the 5G.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it has arose again with 5G. Maybe this is a bad example I was going down. But my point is, it's like there was a and I remember seeing this when they were talking about what was it? It was some safety feature in a car, and they were using examples of how people don't grasp new technologies. I think Volvo was the first car company to introduce full like chest and lap restraints. The modern seatbelt basically pulls all the way across, and they introduced it to the front seats of their cars and made it standard. And there was an article, and I'm not sure if this was in the 70s it came out, but it was by the New York Times, and it was on the front page, and it talked about how these seatbelts shouldn't be mandated, that was dangerous, and that if you're in a horrible car crash, it's actually better for you to be thrown from the car than to be trapped and crushed inside. We now know that is horseshit.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is better to be held in the car and design a car that crinkles around you, and the part that you sit in is stiffer so they can withhold.
Yeah.
But it was new technology, and they said it's bad.
Yeah.
Like right now I hear people say electric cars are worse for the environment, or solar power doesn't work, or I guess wind turbines aren't ready for mainstream because it gets cold outside. All of those things can work, and all of those things that you just said they can't work in. I almost feel like people should just give it a try.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's no harm in that, and I don't know, maybe we'll see a change, but...
And if you do think it's a hoax, then answer me this. The biggest space agency on the planet, or the most successful one, is NASA. They say it's not a hoax. The most powerful and well-funded military on the planet is the United States military, and the Pentagon says it's not a hoax. The smartest and most well-funded groups around the world, be it the European Space Agency or the Japanese Space Agency, or different governments, and not all of these groups like each other. Like China thinks it's a real problem, and us and China right now don't really have the best relationship. So if it was all a hoax, why would two people that don't even get along not just blow the lid off it and screw each other over and go, we can prove that the United States was lying the whole time?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that happen? And why would these massive groups all lie the same way? And why are they the most prestigious groups we have? The ones that attract the smartest people on the planet?
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent question.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe somebody can explain it in the comments. I just honestly don't get it. And to see what I'm looking at, you guys should all check out the NASA climate website. I would say it's one of the more well put together sites that I've seen on the subject, and there's plenty of videos on YouTube where people have bought some of this so-called green technology and used it, and I'll tell you, it's not an advertisement for the companies that make this,
Right.
because if you really watch them, they maybe will have 5 or 6 products, and some of them they will just tear apart and hate. But at the same time, I think a lot of these things that people are saying can be easily dispelled just by watching some people actually use the technology.
Right.
It might even change your mind. It might solve a problem that you have. I know here I lose power and I have a generator, and the generator requires maintenance. And I've often thought, you know what? If that generator dies, I'm going to buy some batteries, home style batteries that are made for this.
Not some double A's.
Yeah, and I'm going to do grid tied. But if I do that route, I know that a lot of the transfer boxes that you buy for those batteries have the ability to plug in some solar power. And I will probably, at a minimum, get some then. If the generator lasts, then eventually I will build a new house. And when I do that, it's definitely going to have solar power.
Yeah. All right. Well, good plan.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, do a little bit more research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's all I've got for today.
All right.
All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye.